Okay, well, I will. I've got 1 minute after, so I think maybe I will get started. As I say, this is being recorded, so if those join us later, they'll be able to catch up. So good morning, good afternoon, or evening to everyone who has been able to join us today. This is our third, as I understand it, Student Advisory Roundtable or START Speaker Series session. I'm Brenda Wallace, and I'm joining you from Saskatoon in Canada. I am part of a reconciliation journey, a learning journey, and wish to express my gratitude to the Nehiyawak and Anishinaabe nations who signed Treaty 6 and are sharing the beautiful lands of the Saskatoon region, as well as the communities of the Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, Dene, and Métis people who call this home. As I suggested, and thanks to those that are starting to pop their introductions and suggest where they're from in the chat, that's great. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Kristina Penn, who is a PhD candidate in geography at the University of Calgary. She's going to explain to us today about her work. She's been working on water balance of Łù'àn Män, or Kluane Lake, which is the largest lake in the Yukon Territory. Kristina will discuss the process, challenges, and successes of leading a community-based and community-engaged PhD research project in the physical sciences. And when I was looking at Kristina's bio in order to introduce her today, I noticed that we might also want to ask her not only about her presentation, but maybe about some of her other roles. So she is the chair of APECS Canada, or the Association of Polar Early Career Scientists, and vice president of Girls on Ice Canada, where she co-founded the Yukon Expedition. Those both sound very interesting, so that might be something we want to ask her about as well. As Kristina's presenting, please feel free to pop questions into the chat. There will also be an opportunity then to raise your hand at the end of her presentation to ask your questions and have a bit of a conversation. So without further ado, Kristina, welcome. Thank you. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brenda. I'm going to share my screen now with my presentation. And I will endeavor to leave time for questions at the end. Okay. Are you seeing the correct screen?
We are seeing the presenter mode rather than the presentation, so we can see the slides. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me do that again. Worked really well on our practice run.
Yes.
How about now?
Perfect.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much for this opportunity to join you all today and to talk to you. Today I'm in Nova Scotia, located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people who have lived in this land for millennia. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Calgary. I did my Master's of Science at the University of Calgary as well. I worked in a glaciated watershed and studied the stable water isotopes within a small glacier system. And after my master's, I was inspired to craft a PhD project that had more direct relevance to communities and that helped to answer questions asked by communities facing challenges related to climate change. My PhD research was completed, or is ongoing, but my work was completed in Southwest Yukon on the traditional territories of the Kluane, Champagne, and Ajic and White River First Nations. And I'm really grateful for the support and collaboration of First Nation governments, elders, and local citizens to have been able to undertake this work. Throughout my talk, you'll hear perspectives of Dr. Alice Johnson, who is a Kluane First Nation elder. And I have recorded Alice Johnson's introduction, and I will play it for you. And if you can't hear it, please holler.
Okay, my name is Alice Johnson. I'm a Kluane First Nation citizen, a member of the Kajat Crow clan, and daughter of Sam and Jesse Johnson and granddaughter of Jimmy and Emma Johnson. I have a doctoral degree in Indigenous knowledge processes from Trent University. I've grown up here. I was born and raised in Burwash Landing, so I grew up on the land and on the trails. Members of our family were in attendance of residential school, so we were bused 500 miles from here to live there. However, the beauty of our parents raising us is that they took us directly to the land. So we didn't grow up within Burwash Landing itself. We grew up at Duke Meadow, down by the Kluane River, and everywhere on the land within this area we have stayed.
You'll be hearing Alice's voice throughout the presentation to supplement some of my experiences with her own perspectives and views. I've worked in a transdisciplinary way where I have integrated perspectives and experiences of the community in combination with field science, lab science, and incorporating quantitative and qualitative data. And this approach has been very complex and time intensive, but it's also been really rewarding, which is what I will talk to you about today. I'll be sharing about the process of implementing calls to action towards reconciliation in graduate research. The calls to action toward reconciliation were introduced in a paper by Wong et al. Published in 2020, and the paper calls on natural scientists to work in a good way with communities. These 10 calls to action challenge the scientific community to recognize that reconciliation requires a new way of conducting natural science, one that includes and respects Indigenous communities, rights, and knowledge, leading to better scientific and community outcomes. The calls are a guideline for not just working in a good way with communities, but also complement good transdisciplinary research principles, such as collaboration with communities, taking time to do meaningful work, place-based research, and weaving multiple knowledge streams, just to name a few. I'm going to walk through the 10 principles. This might be familiar to some of you listening. It might be new, but I think it's a good reminder and a good place to start the talk. The first call is we call on natural scientists to understand the socio-political landscape around their research sites. Call 2, it's a call on natural scientists to recognize that generating knowledge about the land is a goal shared with Indigenous peoples and to seek meaningful relationships and possible collaboration for better outcomes for all involved. Call 3, we call on natural scientists to enable knowledge sharing and knowledge co-production. Call 4, we call on natural scientists studying animals to seek out advice from elders for respectful ways of handling animals. Call 5, we call upon natural scientists to provide meaningful opportunities for Indigenous community members, particularly youth, to experience and participate in science. Call 6, to decolonize the landscape, we call on natural scientists to incorporate Indigenous place names as permitted. Call 7, we call upon natural scientists and their students to take a course on Indigenous history and rights. Call 8, we call on funding bodies to change approaches to funding. Call 9, we call on editors of all scientific journals to recognize that publication of research on Indigenous knowledge and cultural resources require review and permission from the respective Indigenous communities. Call 10, finally, we call on natural scientists and post-secondary research institutions to develop a new vision for conducting natural science. Fundamentally, mainstreaming reconciliation in all aspects of the scientific endeavor, from formulation to completion. This is a a broad picture map just to show everybody where my research was done. So Kluane Män, southern Shoshone for Kluane Lake, is located about 250 kilometers northwest of Whitehorse. I've placed Calgary there for reference because that's where I used to live. I think you can fill in the blank for Saskatoon, but that's the general area. In May 2016, a major drainage reorganization event occurred related to the Cascalosh Glacier. This inspired a lot of scientific curiosity and issues with high relevance to communities and concern in the face of climate change, particularly for regions and communities where glacial sources of water are instrumental to the water supply. So this is a zoomed in view of Kluane Män, and to the west, the snow and ice covered area there is an exposed bit of St. Elias Mountains. And there are Kluane Ranges to the east and Icefield Ranges to the west. And Cascalosh Glacier is a glacier that flows out of the Icefield Ranges down the valley, and then you can see it splitting into the Aichu and the Cascalosh River. And before 2016, the glacier fed both the Aichu, which is southern Shoshone for Slims River, and Cascalosh River. However, as all glaciers, it was retreating, and in 2016, in May, it reached a point in its retreat where it exposed the underlying topography, and the underlying topography resulted in a bit of damming on the Aichu side and a lower gradient toward Cascalosh River. And in May of 2016, nearly all of the Cascalosh Glacier flow was redirected toward Cascalosh River. And this resulted in major and drastic changes in the Kluane Män watershed, which you can see has three communities. Those are the yellow pins. There's Burwash Landing on the north, Destruction Bay a little bit south of there, and Silver City on the southeast shore of the lake. Those are sort of main locations where people settle, but there are trapping cabins and hunting camps and travel routes all around the watershed and around the lake. And this is a very culturally significant region. The drainage basin size was significantly reduced. You can see in the left in the image there, it's an outline of the drainage area for the lake, and there's a dashed line at the south end. This line was drawn in based on local knowledge. It's not modeled, but through conversations with local citizens and community members, I adjusted the drainage basin boundary, and you can see that the drainage basin was significantly reduced. The water level within the lake dropped significantly as well in 2016. It has leveled out since then, but you can see a nearly 2-meter drop in water just over the course of a very short period of time. The impacts on the ground were drastic. Water level dropped by nearly 2 meters. It resulted in the Aichu discharge dropping by about 90%. There's currently no gauge on the river, but based on previous studies published by Sawada and Johnson, and also by Dr. Dan Sugar and team, the Cascalosh Glacier accounted for nearly 90% of the Aichu river discharge. One of the notable and significant consequences has been an increase in mobilized sediment and dust storms, which have impacts through the basin on people, vegetation, and wildlife. So in the right, you can see an image of the river valley. And before the drainage reorganization, this valley would have been full of water. And following drainage reorganization, it looks like it's nearly dried up. On the lake shore, the water level dropped by nearly 2 meters over the course of just a few weeks to a couple months. This left docks suspended. The water hasn't refilled, although the water level has somewhat stabilized. In the photograph, you can see a floatplane dock, which is now unusable, and people have had to rebuild similar docks, as well as find other areas to access the water for fishing, transportation, and also for culturally significant practices. My research takes into account the complex and multifaceted impacts of the drastic change and looks at the two-way relationship between the lake and climate. In 2019, I attended a research summit that was hosted by the Kluane First Nation. I was invited to attend and learn about research priorities, needs, and concerns of the community members. From this meeting, I heard that citizens were concerned about water sources and future sustainability of the resource, including water and fish in the lake. My project asks two key questions. Is the water balance of Łù'àn Män in a state of equilibrium? And the second one is how much carbon dioxide and methane is stored within and released from Łù'àn Män? I have spent 3 full summers and time in the winter in the region collecting water samples, in situ data, learning from community members, local knowledge keepers, engaging with youth, as well as other researchers working in physical and social science spaces. All of this has allowed me to learn about the complex hydrological system in really good depth and breadth. The hydrological system is really complex. This is an image that I drafted for one of the questions that I had in my candidacy exam, and the question asked about the complexity of the system. And so I think it's appropriate to share here because for a scientist, it sparks a lot of curiosity and many questions. There are glaciers and snowpacks stored in the St. Elias Ranges with high peaks. The timing of the snow released from the west side of the watershed is highly variable and also is expected to change. There are lower elevation mountains in the Ruby Ranges to the east of the lake. There is also rich groundwater storage with potential permafrost pockets and also a fault line, just to keep everything interesting. Precipitation falls as snow and rain with quantities and timing of these changing and being further complicated by the mountain system. Lake ice also adds another layer of complexity. And studying all of this has been only possible through transdisciplinary research approaches. And I think I have raised more questions than I will ever be able to answer, but that's kind of the fun in research. Water also has a deep-seated meaning for the people of Kluane First Nation. And this curious and complex hydrological system is really important to the locals.
Water is very important with the decrease of the water levels from within Kluane Lake that comes from the glacial system Aichu, known right beside Tachal Thal, which is Sheep Mountain, Tachal Thal, and all of these place names that are associated within the Southern Shoshone dictionary that Daniel Penn wrote are associated to certain places that are near water. First Nations are always located and connected to the water. The waterways have been transportation routes to different places along the river, and so they're interconnecting like trails. There are trails that connect us to Carmacks.
So, as a researcher, I arrived to Kluane to study the aftermath of this major change that had happened quick like a switch. But Alice tells me about the changes that she and others have observed during their lifetimes. And it's indicative that as a scientist, we see only a snapshot of the duration of our field season, and the awareness and knowledge of these long-term observations and change are very, very important in contextualizing our findings and our observations.
As a First Nation person, having grown up here and having the lake water where it's glacial water and very cold, and we grew up swimming in that lake. Now you can people can walk in, and it's becoming very warm at the at the north end of our community. And the water sustains us. It sustains us because we harvest the fish. With climate change, we are unable to harvest the whitefish across the lake. In October, when I was a child, we used to be able to go across the lake in October to harvest the whitefish and harvest the eggs and the meat, and that sustained our families, but it also took care of our animals. And so they grew up, our dogs grew up eating fish. So food is very important when it comes to Kluane Lake and many of the watershed areas, like Sweet Johnson Creek has the grayling. So when we're out harvesting in different seasons or doing the seasonal rounds, we will be out harvesting the grayling when they come out of I believe they bury themselves in mud, and then in the spring they come up Kluane River. The water is very important, and the concern about the glacial system and the shifting of the river is the water warming to a point where fish, maybe, hopefully, we hope they might climatize. But these fish have grown up, in those depths in cold water. Mm-hmm. So now it's very, very warm. And so there's an imbalance. It starts to create that imbalance. And the water has been dropping for a long time. And I know that, and that's my story, because when I came back in 2002, I came back from university and was doing some research here, doing some work with Kluane First Nation as a summer student, and I noticed different things as I'm coming in, and with climate change and human impacts. Like, you look along the Alaska Highway and you'll see, when the government was seeding the highways for the grass and plants to grow, they planted non-traditional plants. Mm-hmm. That has taken over the grass that they planted, has taken over Duke Meadow, so that has impacted the gophers that live there, because they have no protection, and it was not like that when I was growing up, or even as a young woman, and now I'm an elder.
Physical science research in a community can be really tricky because it can be really easy to focus in on the data collection, which involves physical features like water, soil, and such. But the timelines and resources that we work with don't often permit budgets, flexibility, and time that are required to build relationships and do the extra work that may not directly turn itself into a graph or map or a table. However, when research is done in a community, the work we do is relevant to the people living there, and therefore it's important to establish and build relationships and to take the time to do it in a good way and establish opportunities for sharing knowledge and asking questions. I've been very fortunate to work in a community who create opportunities for collaboration and open communication. Kluane First Nation have hosted 3 research summits to bring together researchers and local community, and these have been really instrumental in facilitating my research project. The QR code takes you to a project called Bringing Research Home, which was a project completed by Kluane First Nation in conjunction with, or in collaboration with other researchers from Canadian institutions. And the project talks about this relationship between researchers and community members and outlines research priorities. It's a really excellent resource. I will play another couple voice notes from Alice.
Science has not always embraced Indigenous knowledge, and even the term Indigenous knowledge came from scientists wanting to know what that meant, right? So it's not a concept that we say we're Southern Shoshone and we're from Łù'àn Män, so therefore Łù'àn Män stories and songs and knowledge is what we know. So it's a blending of those two worlds that the scientists need to understand that the giant worm lives up in the glacial system. They need to know those stories. They need to know that knowledge that we have, because when I'm writing in my dissertation, I talk about how our traditional knowledge validates scientific knowledge as opposed to the other way around. We need to make sure that everything, whether you're a Southern Shoshone or a First Nation and the scientists, need to be able to see that whole picture of everything working together. And fusing those two worldviews together to make sure that we have a place for future generations.
I did an interview with the Champion and Ajuk elder, Ron Chambers, and I discussed the benefits of large-scale system science-based projects. And he talked to me about his experience working in a resource conservation career. And he said that learning about a variable like temperature and thermodynamic change in the lake is also connected to fish habitat. And it's important to look at the big picture scale of the watershed. He said that just because the temperature is changing in one area of the lake and the fish are no longer in that location, it doesn't mean that the observed change is representative of this entire lake. The fish may have migrated, and we need to consider how change in one location may lead to changes in another location. And this also came up in a conversation with Sam White, who is a fisherman, who talks about an abundance of fish and the importance of knowing where they have moved in the face of changing climate and, in conjunction, changing lake dynamics. Here, Alice talks about good science, what good science looks like, and she also emphasizes the importance of sharing data and results of research projects in ways that are accessible to community members and to youth and elders.
Good science would have scientists that seek out the knowledge of place and space, because that's where the knowledge is. And when I was talking about the mapping, there you can map knowledge, right? You can map that knowledge system to different spaces, to different places and peoples, and the relationship of the peoples. So it's accepting traditional knowledge from place as valid, as opposed to scientists had the attitude and perspective that traditional knowledge is over there. But really, traditional knowledge is here, and good science would embrace that and blend the two worldviews to understand the theories and the methods within that kind of system. So it's very important to listen and understand the values and principles of peoples to those places and spaces, as well as the animals, and to have respect for that, and to understand some of the protocols around it, because there are protocols for knowledge, the sharing of it and the accessing of it. Something that we've brought up, and I continue to bring up even at the research summits, you know, whenever I'm in attendance at a meeting, is to have students who are doing their research here, not only because there's a traditional knowledge guidelines for working here for Kluane First Nation, but there's also you know, the sharing of that knowledge, because we've had other individuals who you know, when they produce their books or they produce their research, I've also asked that they share, you know, their PhDs or their master's degrees with Kluane First Nation and put it into the archives. So then we have our own body of knowledge, right? Stored in a certain place.
In February of 2024, I was at Burwash Landing and attended community meetings and also had individual conversations with citizens to share preliminary results of my project. I wanted to share these findings at an early stage, gain input and perspective, so that analysis could be done in conjunction with and with the context of local knowledge. I shared data and talked through plots like the ones you see on the screen, confirming that what I had observed in 2 summers was representative of long-term observations or potentially outliers. And this was an opportunity to invite feedback and contextualize my findings. So the 2 examples that I've shared are stable water isotope plots. The top one is for rivers flowing into Łù'àn Män, and the bottom one is the oxygen 18 and deuterium plot of all water samples that I collected over the course of my field campaigns. And I talked the citizens through these plots and explained what I was seeing, and then we talked about their observations and how they might differ or how they may complement what the data were showing. And I think that exercise has been really, really helpful, and it's enriched my data analysis processes. I've been really fortunate to have been able to engage and consult with First Nation members, governments, and local citizens throughout the lifespan of my research project. The research questions and project logistics were outlined in consultation with and support of the First Nation government and with community members. And I received guidance on field data collection methods and logistics from citizens and from local knowledge keepers. I wrote a reflection piece in Info North about the dual benefits of spending an extended time period in the region. And in this article, I recorded my conversation with Polly Sias, who is a member of the Kluane First Nation and at the time was the nation's executive director. This article communicates the importance of slowing down to formulate meaningful relationships and meaningful research with benefits not just to the scientists by resulting in better science, but also to community members and citizens by being able to have a say in the science, making it relevant to the questions and issues that they face. I've communicated my research results at an intermediate stage with community members. Throughout my time in the Yukon, I engaged with youth, attended community events, and also had opportunities to engage with other researchers. And all of this has strengthened my understanding of the complex hydrological system and also manifested a transdisciplinary approach to my research. My contact information is there, and I think you all received it through your emails, but I'm going to wrap up now, and we can have some time for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kristina. So I'll re-encourage everyone if you would like to raise your hand. And I see that there's some virtual applause coming through, which is great.
Thank you.
If anyone would like to raise their hand and ask any questions of Kristina, we certainly have some time for that. I don't see anything that has emerged from the chat as yet. And actually, while people are thinking about and either popping a question into the chat or thinking about raising their hand, I had a couple that I wouldn't mind maybe floating past you just to get the conversation started, Kristina. So I really appreciate you sharing the 10 calls to action for scientists. And I wondered, I guess, how each of us might onboard that. And so you mentioned you've had collaborations and conversations with other researchers. Did you spend time in your reflection actually going back to those calls and mapping how your research approach would respond to those, so that maybe it flags areas where you need to move forward with things? Or yeah, I just wondered what you learned through that process of onboarding those calls to action.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I I started my PhD at a really fortunate time, which is when all of these conversations were taking place within the First Nation and researchers that worked there. And when the paper came out, it got so much attention, and the co-authors went on a Canada-wide, maybe even worldwide tour with this paper. And they held not just visiting talks, but they also had workshops. And in those workshops, they broke down the calls and they invited participants to commit to one, two, or three calls that they would focus on addressing throughout their work, and also encouraged to have accountability partners with other researchers in checking in on the process, in recognizing that some of these calls are suitable for short-term for for incorporation on the short term, and others are more longer term, bigger picture calls. And so I picked a few of them that were that spoke to me and that I felt that I could really incorporate into my work. And then I picked one or two that were more of a personal challenge that I would have to, as a graduate student, I don't have my own budget, for example. So those calls required a bit of a budget change, which I approached my supervisor with, um, and worked to incorporate.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kristina. I see that Michaela has raised her hand. Michaela, go ahead.
Hi, Kristina. Thank you
Hey.
so much. That presentation was so exciting and cool. I do have a question, but there was like two things that I was like, this is so awesome. And one of them was the quote about traditional knowledge validating scientific knowledge rather than the other way around. It was like so succinctly stated, but it's something that like I feel like when you're doing transdisciplinary work with Indigenous communities, you bump up against that. And I loved hearing someone say it. And yeah, it just resonated really much. Um, I'm interested in, if you don't mind telling us a little bit more about, I guess, the distribution of the community's population. Are there other communities in that area, or is it really that one First Nation? And then is it like the people are in one settlement area, or is there kind of some distribution there? And then the question being, how did you know how to involve people, who to talk to? Yeah, I guess like how did you go about your engagement and getting participation?
Yeah, very good question. So the the First Nation, so there are three communities that would be like dots on the map, and that would be Burwash Landing, Destruction Bay, and Silver City. And both of those communities are home to Kluane First Nation, Champagne and Ajax First Nation, and White River First Nation members, but also people that have moved into the communities from outside of the First Nations. There's also a nearby larger community called Haines Junction, which is about a couple-hour drive south of Burwash Landing. Some citizens live there, um, and there are also citizens living all over Canada and down in the US and throughout the world. So as a starting point, I approached Kluane First Nation government, and I reached out to them with the desire to do a research project in that region and asking how can I make my project relevant? I stated that I was really interested in this drainage reorganization and how I can build off of the skills that I learned in my master's to do some work there. And again, really lucky time circumstance, they were about to host this research summit in 2019. And they said, you know what? We've had a few cancellations. If you can get yourself out here, why don't you come to this summit and just listen and see what people have to say? And again, very lucky. I was able to go there without an agenda. I just had a list of skills that I had in terms of scientific inquiry. But I sat around a table with people from the communities, with people from Parks Canada, with people from Yukon government and other universities. And conversations just sort of came out of that. And I went back to the Kluane First Nation government, to their liaison, and I said, well, based on the summit, this is what I learned people care about, and I think I can answer this question about future water resource security. Um, and I got their support, and they helped me build some of the primary connections, and then it kind of snowballed from there. So I spoke to my supervisor, and I said, I think it would be so beneficial for me to essentially move to the Yukon for quite some time and spend a summer there and see the lake ice break up, and then see the ice start forming on the lake, on the rivers. And I made a compelling case, and he agreed. And being there, I participated in things like community garbage cleanup along the highway and along the lake shore. And that's I think you get the gist of it. It just kind of those relationships built naturally from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Problem.
Thanks for your question, Michaela. I see we also received another one through the chat, which I'll pose for you, Kristina. So from Anna, really also supporting and expressing the resonance and appreciation for this idea of Indigenous knowledge as being a Western concept, and that how traditional knowledge validates what you're finding through scientific knowledge and not the other way around. What she's wondering is how could she share these sentiments in her own work, and is it possible to do so? So how do we onboard that as researchers ourselves?
A good place to start would be, at least in my experience, a good place to start would be to look at resources and information that comes out of the community. Alice talks about her PhD thesis, which I was able to access and read through, and that pointed me in a starting direction of connecting with Alice. Participating in community events to be able to form some connections and start those conversations. I think there are several scales of engaging in data analysis and data verification with community. One could be to look at community resources and reports and any sort of information that's available. It could look like reaching out to the to the local government or local resource management board to connect with them and see if there are folks there who are willing to talk and review your findings, all the way through to what I did was I applied for an ethics approval to conduct official interviews with community members, and I received my supervisor's support and the University of Calgary support to engage in that activity. This is much more time and resource intensive, and I would definitely say in any time engaging with communities, it is the most beneficial to go and be there and be present, without an obvious agenda. Like if your goal is to engage with the community, showing up to a potluck where you've been invited, or showing up to a community event to make friendships and to start building relationships is definitely more successful in the end than putting up posters and cold calling for participants. Although in other communities, maybe that's an effective way of doing it. A lot of communities will also have liaisons, so people that can connect, that are sort of a middle person. That's how my connections were formed. I connected with the Kluane First Nation government and the Champion and Ajax First Nation government liaisons, and they built some of those initial connections. And always, I would say, always have room and capacity for honorariums as well, because people in communities, especially Indigenous folks, get asked to do a lot of work. And I think in my experience, they don't they're not going to put a price on it. Some communities, some First Nations will have an honorarium guide, but in my case, I sort of connected with the First Nation government and asked for a guideline, and yeah, when taking people's time, it's really good practice to also compensate them for that time. Yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
That was a very rich answer, Kristina. Thank you
Thanks.
very much. You gave us lots of good starting points, which I might go to Chloe's question next, which I think reflects the richness of the community that you worked in as well. So she's, like as I am, really impressed with how organized the community is around this question of research impact in community to community, not happening to us, but with us and by us. So the question she poses here is, how long has research been going on in the area? They have this website and these research summits. Do they have other partners in helping create the capacity for the community to have this rich resource that they are taking some ownership control over the research agenda in their geography?
Okay, that is a big question, and I'm going to try to be succinct in my answer. How long research has been going on? A long time. This drainage reorganization event definitely put the area on the map for a lot of scientists. There was a lot of media attention around it, and there was a lot of attention in the scientific community around it, and it pulled, I think, a lot of younger researchers and early career researchers to take an interest in it. There's also a very, very well-established research program on the wildlife. There is the research station on the southeast shore, which is where I worked out of, Kluane Lake Research Station. They've been around for decades and has a history of research presence there. There's also further down the highway a place called Squirrel Camp. It's one of the longest running biology research projects. Don't quote me on this. I want to say started in the 50s, 60s, 70s. There's there's a long history of research and research presence, and the relationship between researchers and community members has fluctuated, and it's a very complex relationship, um, which I won't muddle my response with. Um, but the community has done a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of work in regaining or taking steps towards regaining agency over the research work that takes place there. Because as you can imagine, a lot of researchers flooding to a small region that all of it is very significant culturally, can cause a lot of damage. So they've taken some of that agency back through this bringing research home project, and there's spin-off projects going on right now as well. And it's I will definitely give all the credit to Kluane First Nation, but they've also partnered up with Yukon University, University of Ottawa. There are others. I don't mean to leave anyone out, but there are some trusted researchers and collaborators who have been working closely with the nation, to towards encouraging these steps towards reconciliation with other researchers. And there's also Parks Canada. Kluane National Park is is on the west side of the lake, and there's a relationship there as well, which has seen growth and gone through reconciliation as well.
Thank you, Kristina. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
We have about 10 more minutes, or about 8 more minutes. I see there's one more question from Chrissy, which I might voice and hope that we have enough time for. So she's suggesting, as many of us have already, just a great presentation, amazing work, amazing community, obviously. What Chrissy is wondering is whether you have some tips and tricks or some advice on how to effectively translate scientific findings and results into local languages and contexts, so that you can do that contextualization and validation that you've been talking about. How do you make that meaningful for them? And then, to be able, so that they can add their unique cultural, linguistic, and knowledge systems into it.
For sure. I'm going to go back and echo one of the calls to action, which was to use Indigenous place names where possible, and with permission. So Indigenous languages, some of them are evolving, because elders are building on a written body of work to record these languages, and they're changing. And so sometimes when you find a place name that's published in a paper 10 years ago, the spelling of that place name or the actual place name could have changed since then. So I would say start with, again, the community liaisons, directly people in the community, and ask them about what their practices are and their permissions around using local knowledge and Indigenous place names. Some research grants, like some NSERC discovery grants, do have room for supervisors to pay for certain amount of translation. I'm going to give a plug to some of the work that Brenda mentioned in my introduction. Through APECS Canada, I've been able to connect with ArcticNet, and this is for all of you in Canada. I pitched to ArcticNet that it'd be great to have a translation fund for research abstracts, and I'm going to post a link here. There's actually now a fund available through ArcticNet for early career researchers to receive funding to translate research abstracts, research materials into Indigenous languages. So I encourage you to have a look there. Another project that we're working on with APECS Canada is called Arctic Science to Art Contest. The applications are actually open right now, so lucky timing. This project asks scientists to submit some information about their research, and then we select a winner of the contest, and we partner them up with a an artist. And ideally, we hope to find an artist in the local community who will get paid a salary to do the work, but the artist and the scientist will work together to create a comic strip um, of the research project. And last year's comic strip was translated into 3 languages: English, French, and the local Indigenous language that the research came from. So I don't have that link is out there, but if you Google Arctic Science to Art contest, that opportunity is there as well. Yeah, so unfortunately, and for very good reason, it costs money to do this work. And if the money is not too much of a bind, then going directly to the community is the most direct route to doing that. Otherwise, there are some resources that can assist early career researchers with accomplishing that.
Really great. Thank you, Kristina. So we have about 3 minutes left. I might just ask the broad question of, is there anything that you'd hope we might have asked you that we haven't, that you'd like to share with us before we sign off today, or any sort of last summary you'd like to give?
Oh, I just want to yeah, I just want to acknowledge that that I've been in a really fortunate position to have worked with such a collaborative community, and I have been lucky to find mentorship in Alice Johnson, and bringing her voice into this presentation has clearly been very, very impactful for everyone. And every time I infuse her voice into the presentations, people always find it more meaningful to hear directly from the community. And I would encourage everyone to look at those 10 calls to action and see what you can implement in your work and your research. Partner up with somebody for accountability, or write it directly into the research proposal for accountability. And yeah, stay connected with the communities. And sometimes it takes a while for them to answer emails, answer calls, um, or arrange meetings. But honestly, like, if you don't give up and keep trying, that effort does get noticed, and it can lead to really meaningful ways of engaging.
A great final summary, Kristina. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And I see the accolades and applause starting to come to roll in again. So unless there's
Thank
any
you.
last questions from anyone, I think we will call this session today to a close and await what our topic will be for next month. But Kristina, really a wonderful presentation. I learned much from you. I was taking many notes. Really appreciate the work that you've done and your insights in sharing how that community relationship and how transdisciplinary approaches have worked in your work. So thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day, everyone, or evening. Take care.